What Netflix didn't tell you about Madeleine McCann might be the key to understanding everything that happened that night, and maybe you've already overlooked it. Imagine a dusty VHS tape tucked away at the bottom of a drawer. The cover promises the truth, but when you press play, you realize something's been cut. The images flow, the music swells, the voices speak with confidence, yet deep down something nags, like a pause that never resumes, like a crucial scene is missing, the one that could change everything. That's how I felt watching Netflix's documentary on the Madeleine McCann case. And maybe you did too, because it's not just what they showed, it's what they left out. What Netflix didn't tell you about Madeleine might be the piece that changes everything. The documentary's surface is polished, well-produced, gripping. But behind the meticulous editing, there's a silence that's not accidental. It's a chosen silence. A silence that shapes what you feel, what you think, and most importantly, what you stop questioning. The visible part of the iceberg is there, beautiful, compact, designed to fit into episodes. But what's below never made it to the screen. The Madeleine McCann case is one of the most famous in the world, and Netflix's series seemed like the chance to finally see it all clearly. But what we got was a powerful and partial version. Relevant evidence, alternative testimonies, parallel investigations were left out, not by chance, by editorial decision. They cut what could unsettle. They edited what could complicate. And in doing so, they delivered a safe, digestible, palatable narrative. Entertainment that replaced legitimate doubt with a false sense of closure. But that choice came at a cost. And what was left out isn't a minor detail. It's the very pieces that, if put back, could turn the story upside down, or at least force us to restart the puzzle from scratch. In this video, we're going to do what Netflix didn't. We're diving into the submerged part, the raw, uncomfortable part that never made it to streaming. Here you'll see the files that were omitted, the names that weren't mentioned, the behind-the-scenes details that didn't fit the script. And maybe for the first time, you'll realize that the silence lingering after the final episode wasn't the end. It was just the point where the real story started to hide. If you also felt something didn't add up, it's time to dive where the streaming spotlight didn't reach. Get ready. The truth isn't what Netflix showed, it's what they chose to hide. And what if the most important part of the story was never told? In 2007, when Madeleine McCann vanished from a resort in Portugal, the world didn't just stop, it froze. There was something about that image, a little blonde girl smiling in her parents' arms, that became a symbol of collective pain. It was as if everyone knew that child, as if she were part of every family that ever left a window ajar, that ever believed the worst could never happen. And the media felt it. Within hours, the case was in every newspaper, in every language. No matter where you were, there was a Madeleine on the news. And over time, in everyone's memory. But what was meant to be a search for the truth became something else. It became a spectacle. And so, more than a decade later, Netflix released its documentary with a dense narrative, top-tier production, and impactful testimonies, but also with glaring absences. The project presented itself as a definitive reconstruction. But if you look closely, you'll see it doesn't reconstruct, it chooses. And that's where the conflict no one talks about comes in. Because what was left out, and this isn't speculation, it's fact, changes everything. Think about it. How do you tell the story of a disappearance without consulting forensic experts? How do you discuss suspicions without including the documents that raise those suspicions? How do you reconstruct a confusing night without showing all the versions of that night? These silences aren't accidental, and this is where a term explains what happened: framing. Framing is a technique that shapes how you understand a story. Instead of showing everything, you choose what fits in the frame, and everything that doesn't ceases to exist for the viewer. In the case of the Madeleine documentary, the frame is clear. The focus is on the parents, the emotional impact, the tourist context of the region. Everything is packaged to make the audience feel one thing: empathy, which in itself isn't wrong. But if that focus comes at the cost of omitting technical, investigative, and contradictory elements, then we have a problem. Where are the independent experts? Where are the interviews conducted outside the UK? Why don't we see footage of the sniffer dogs reacting at key locations? Why does the documentary only briefly mention the Portuguese police as if they were a distant noise? No one gives the answer, but the absence screams. And it screams because it touches something not in the scenes: our trust, When Netflix decided what to show, they also decided what you were allowed to know. They determined which parts of the iceberg you could see, but what stayed submerged didn't disappear. It's there, cold, dense, and capable of sinking any version that seems too solid. And the question that starts to nag isn't what happened to Madeleine anymore. The real question is, why did they choose to show only this piece of the story? Who benefits from it? And who lost the chance to know the whole truth? Maybe the answer is closer than it seems, but only if you're ready to dive where streaming doesn't reach. And that's exactly where we're going now. You remember that scene in the documentary where the experts speak with such conviction, with such perfectly placed scripting, that it feels like everything's been resolved? That wasn't a resolution, it was a framing trick. Now imagine that, right after that, there's material that didn't make it in. An audio recorded in one of the interrogation rooms, where the version told to the camera starts to unravel in details. Voices waver, dates don't align, and a name comes up, one the documentary never mentions. That audio exists. And it's not just that. There are pages from the Portuguese police report that were sidelined, including sections with technical observations that cast certain evidence in a new light. One of them, the sniffer dogs reacting in specific areas of the room. And even though this was recorded on video, the footage didn't make it. Why, you might ask? The answer is uncomfortable, and at the same time, all too familiar. Because there's a huge difference between telling what's true and crafting a story that works. And this is where the twist hurts most. Netflix's documentary may not have invented anything, but omission is a very effective way to control what you'll believe. And when the narrative is in the hands of those who decide what makes the cut, the risk is that the truth becomes a background actor. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a scripting choice, and it comes at a high cost, especially when it's about a child's disappearance, and a family that might have been judged too much, or perhaps protected too much. That's the question that starts to emerge, and it gains strength as the forgotten pieces return to the table. There are public documents, did you know, that the documentary never even mentioned. One of them describes the movement of people on the night of the disappearance. The timeline shifts, the times don't match. And the most curious part, the security cameras in part of the resort were turned off that night. Do you think that made it into Netflix's narrative? Not a word. And if it were just one detail, fine. But this is a pattern. It's part of a larger choice, to show only what reinforces the central story, while what complicates stays out of frame. The philosopher Hannah Arendt once said, "When everyone lies about everything all the time, the consequence isn't that people believe the lies, but that no one believes anything anymore." That's what this kind of narrative causes, a weariness, a whatever. But it's not whatever, because every cut has a cost, every silence, a weight. And this doesn't just affect our perception, it affects families, it affects investigations, it affects the very idea of justice. Because if you leave a camera out of the room at the most critical moment, what you're saying is, this piece of truth isn't convenient. That's why what was left out hurts more than what was shown. Not because of theories, but because of what was stolen from us. The chance to see everything before judging anything. And now, after all this, I found myself thinking, what if the version closest to the truth was never told because it didn't fit into an 8-episode script? Maybe it's not just about Madeleine. Maybe it's about all the times they chose the comfort of a good edit over the mess of the truth. And some things, only those who felt deceived understand. Now tell me, have you ever had that feeling that a piece was missing from the puzzle and everyone pretended the picture was complete? That's where the next part begins, because there's more coming, and what it reveals changes everything. Have you ever felt that something was missing even after the last episode? Like the silence at the end wasn't peace, but absence? That's the feeling that lingered after the documentary's credits rolled. The Madeleine case seemed packaged, edited, ready for consumption. But there was a part they didn't touch, not because they forgot, but because they knew it didn't fit the surface of the narrative. And maybe it was exactly there, in what doesn't fit, that we needed. The question changes. We're not just trying to understand what happened to Madeleine anymore. We're trying to understand what they did with the truth. Because when you find out that evidence was cut, that entire interview segments never made it into the documentary, that voices were silenced without explanation, you can't watch it the same way anymore. The story Netflix showed was too solid to be sincere. Think about it. The voices that questioned, gone. The most uncomfortable doubts, unaddressed. The most sensitive material, left in the drawer. That's not editing. That's a choice. And that's where what I promised from the start comes in. The truth that was missing. It's not a final answer. It's the discomfort that nags when someone tells you that's all there was, and you feel deep down that it wasn't. One of the mothers interviewed, who didn't even make the final cut, said a phrase that's never left my mind. It's like they wanted to give us an ending because they can't stand an open story. And that's it. The pain of not knowing became something that bothers those who didn't live it. And so they try to close it. But this story doesn't have a ready-made ending, because truth isn't something that comes edited with background music and a circular narrative. Truth is a process, painful, risky, and often solitary. And every person who chooses to look again, think again, doubt the ready-made version, takes part in that process. That's why this video didn't come to give you certainties. It came to give you the courage to ask the questions the original script didn't want to answer. We live in a time where everything needs to be fast, compact, easy to understand, but some cases, like this one, don't fit that logic because they involve silence. And silence, when it's a choice, is also a message. What was left out of the documentary may never be fully recovered, but what we do with what remains, that's in our hands. Collective memory doesn't have to follow what was approved. It can be rebuilt. It must be. And the strongest part of all this, it's realizing that, contrary to what it seems, the truth doesn't hide. It waits, concealed but present, in fragments, in contradictions, in whispers amid an overly polished edit. When I look at this case now, I no longer see just a disappearance. I see a reflection of our fear of doubting, of our rush to accept, of our exhaustion with searching. And maybe that's why the documentary pleased so many people, because it relieves. But you're not here to be relieved. You're here because you also felt something was wrong. And if you felt it, you're already on the other side, where the question matters more than the answer, where discomfort is worth more than a rushed conclusion. The truth was never a finished film. It's what you have the courage to keep seeking. And now that we've come this far, there's something I need to tell you. What was left out of this documentary is just the beginning. There's more, much more. But to see it, you need to be willing to look without the soundtrack. Because what's at the bottom of the iceberg wasn't made to please, it was made to warn. If you felt this in your chest while listening, then you know this story is still alive. Not for what was said, but for what they tried to silence. Reformulated final part. I'm not satisfied with halves. That phrase haunts me, because every time they try to wrap a story in too neat a bow, I get suspicious. Every time the editing feels more comforting than true, I stop and look again. Because half the truth isn't truth. It's silence shaped to fit the screen. It's control disguised as narrative. And if you've stayed until now, maybe you feel it too. That nagging discomfort, that sense that there's more outside the frame, that's where everything changes. Because this search from here on doesn't happen alone. It happens when someone like you decides not to accept what was served and starts asking what was left off the plate. The hidden truth can't withstand many hands digging in the same place. And if you felt the weight of this silence, then you've already started to break it. Some things we feel before we even understand. That sense that something's missing, that the story was told, but only as far as it suited. And the rest? It stayed in silence. It stayed in the part the camera didn't show. Netflix's documentary seemed complete, but what they called the final version was just the visible part. The rest was edited, cut, suppressed. And that's where the discomfort lies. Because when you start piecing together what was left out, the pieces shift. And suddenly the image that seemed clear starts to blur. That's what brought me here. And if you've reached this point with me, it's because you felt it too. The truth, when it unsettles, is a sign it's still alive. And maybe what we're doing here is the right questions, the ones that don't fit in ready-made scripts, the ones that disturb, the ones no one wants to put on screen. What they call the end, to me, is still the middle. And that's why I keep going, because I'm not satisfied with halves. If this story cut through you in some way, the super chat is more than a gesture. It's almost a silent scream, a way of saying, I saw, I felt. I won't pretend this didn't touch me. Right there, I dive with you. It's not for me, it's for everything that was hidden, for everything they tried to bury with a soundtrack and a smooth edit. Every super chat here is a piece of the light Netflix left out. And if we don't shine it, no one will. This isn't just a channel, it's a trench against forgetting. Those who send an I dive with you aren't just watching, they're choosing to be part of it. Now, I want to know what stayed with you. Which part gave you chills? Which silence unsettled you? Leave it in the comments. It can be just a line, but let it be real. I'll read every word, because this doesn't end with me. It begins with those who feel it together. And if you're here, feeling all this with me, subscribe. Not to follow another channel, but to continue this search we're doing together. Because in the next video, the wound stays open. And maybe we'll need to go even deeper. Maybe what they call conspiratorial is just what no one had the courage to ask out loud. And maybe you're already ready for that. So come, we'll meet where the official version ends and where the truth begins.